Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
I'm most pleased to welcome you to our program. Last week on this program, we had three guests that are back this week, and we were discussing nonfiction books. It was such a delight for me to be with our guests, and they had a real variety of readings they had done this summer, and they're recommended to you. This week, they will deal with fiction, and again, we have, if time permits, about 9 books we would like to get through concerning the reading they've done. They're all three very extensive with their reading, both in volume and quality. I welcome to the program, first of all, Annie McKinley, a colleague. She's in the field of speech communication at North Idaho College as a faculty member. Her master's degree in that field comes from Eastern Washington University. Next to her is Denise Clark, who holds a master's degree from Western Washington University in library science and is a librarian at North Idaho College. And I always describe her as a person that is the walking library. And next to her is Dr. Deborah Sprague, who teaches English and has a doctor's degree in English from University of Washington in Seattle. Thanks to all three of you. You're great friends, you're great colleagues, and it's just a pleasure to have you here as we did last year. I like this to be an annual program for us. Let's get right into what you've read. Last week we talked a little bit about your interests, but we're just going to get right into the books. And Annie, I'll start with you. Would you pick your first book, if you have out of the three, a favorite one that you'd like to recommend to our viewers and what it's all about?
Yeah, I have really 4 today that I'm going to recommend, but I'll start with this one called Losing Julia by Jonathan Hall, because I know Deborah has also read it. One of the things that I liked about this book, that I like about a lot of books and some of the other ones that we have, is how creatively it's written. It's written in 3 voices of the same person. I think that's how you describe it. The first one voice is in World War II, when he was a young man during the war. The second voice would be when he met Julia about 10, 15 years later. And then the last one, and that's probably the favorite voice of the book, is he's in a nursing home. So when he goes, and it goes back and forth, but every time they go back, he talks, or he is in that particular character rather than just like reminiscing. And I just think it's just a beautiful book because of the way that he describes the war and all these young men being in the war, and this one, his best friend's fiancée is named Julia, and how the friend talks about Julia all this time. But when he's killed, Julia can't be notified or whatever because the family won't have anything to do with her and stuff. And then how the story progresses. But the interesting thing about him being in the nursing home and his friendships he develops, but he doesn't want to develop because he gets new roommates and he wonders how long the roommate's going to be around. And the roommates are such characters and stuff. And then the next thing he knows, the roommate's gone and stuff. But
so it makes it hard to have a connection that gets too close to them and they lose them.
Yeah. So.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Denise, your first book of fiction you want to talk about?
Well, actually, Deborah and I belong to the same book club, and over the summer we read one called Being Dead by Jim Crace. Crace is a novelist to watch out for. I think this man is a fine writer. In fact, this is the second book of his I've read. Deborah and I both read an earlier one called Quarantine. Not only, what he does is he takes a couple and he follows them through, their meeting and middle age and then their untimely end. And he moves back and forth in the novel. And I think, Deborah, some comments you would like to make about it? It's the strangest. It's one of the strangest
It's very
novels.
strange because you're reading about really ghoulish things in a sense. He talks about the decomposition of the body and what happens after death, yet it's not disgusting. It's almost comforting in the way that he describes it. And it's hard to explain that other than to say, just read the book and I think you'll see what we mean. But it's just really well done.
It's extremely. In fact, I'd like to share just a little bit of the ending, so that
it just sounds like it wouldn't be a subject that you could just make comforting.
Absolutely, but the ending, I think, will will bring that point across that Deborah made. He ends, and still today and every day the dunes are lifted, stacked, and undermined. When they were murdered in the sand dunes called on Baritone Bay. Their crests migrate and reassemble with the wind. They do their best to raise their backs against the weather and the sea and block the wind-borne sorrows of the world. All along the shores of Baritone Bay and all the coasts beyond, tide after tide, time after time, the corpses and the broken, thin remains of fish and birds, of barnacles and rats, of mollusks, mammals, mussels, crabs are lifted, washed, and sorted by the waves. And Joseph and Celise enjoy a loving and unconscious end beyond experience. These are the ever-ending days of being dead.
Thank you for doing that. I see what you're referring to. I'm going to go to Deborah now, and we're going to get another book.
We're sharing here.
We're sharing books that you've both read.
Actually, all three of us have read this one. And after listening to what Denise said last week about the book about the bees, what was the name of the man who followed the beehives? Yes. This, you might think it's also about bees. It's not. Bee season refers to spelling bees, and it's a young girl who has a kind of a magical gift for spelling, and her father, who is very ambitious for her, enters her in spelling contests.
And the author?
Mila Goldberg, and it's a first novel. I wish you could see the picture of her, because she kind of looks like this Pippi Longstocking-ish character. I'm sure you can't see that, but it really is wonderful.
It is. It's in fact, I was amazed it was the first novel. I was very impressed. I'll read her next book when it comes out. 4 members of this family, and they're a Jewish family. There's Miriam and Saul, mother and father, and the son Aaron, and what is her name? Yes, Eliza. And all 4 members of the family are seeking a spiritual experience, and they're going very divergent ways about that. Aaron becomes a Buddhist, right? And I don't want to give away. I don't think the best part of the book. We shouldn't tell them about the best part of it.
It is a very dysfunctional family. I mean, we seem to read a lot about dysfunctional families, but intriguing and wonderful, and at the same time.
But each one taking a somewhat different path.
Each one taking a somewhat different path to bring order to their world. To bring order to their world. I sense there's
a lot of humor too.
Some. Particularly at the spelling bees, you hear the details about the child in front who just wet her pants. I mean, it's just a type of thing where you're these contests, and that doesn't sound humorous, but I mean, the way that it's written, it is. Just the stress of being in competition.
Annie, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, that's what too, and it's just her passion for the spelling bees and her passion for words, and there is just a couple of interesting real twists on the characters that is just like, whoa. And you just think that's just it's and when I first tried to find it on the internet too, I had the wrong thing, and I typed in bee something, and I think I came up with beekeepers and all this other kind of stuff. So, and I don't know if that's if that's a dying art. Do we still have the spelling bees? And
oh yes,
because it was right up to a national level
contest. Oh yes, every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just have to interject here that you're so fascinated with this subject that I suppose that when Denise retires from North College, that she's going to work with beehives and raise bees. Annie, let's go back to you, and you have other books.
Okay, I have the one I'm going to recommend is some of the viewers are going to go, that's been around for a while. You just discovered that, and I'm one too that I don't know. Maybe some of the other viewers are like this. Thick books intimidate me. So when I kept saying this thick book, I said I can't read that. And so I finally, people convinced me to read it. Pillars of the Earth by is it Follett? I think it's a. Anyway,
it's
Follett.
Okay.
He's more known for his spy mysteries and stuff. This one, though, is one where it takes place in about probably the year 1000 or whatever. It's the building of cathedrals and how the cathedrals were built. And he tells it like a novel, and the family and all the things they go through, and it's just a fascinating book. And you look at the way that cathedrals are built a totally different way, because you just kind of like how they got the rock and how they got the granite and how they had to trade land and all the politics of the church and everything. But it's a fascinating read.
So it sounds like it's one of those books that it combines characters that are fiction, in nature, fictitious characters, but with something that happened, that is,
Right.
with the construction of the cathedral.
Yeah, because they used the actual names of the kings at that time, and probably some of the popes at the time and stuff. Yeah.
That's not that uncommon to take a fiction and incorporate into some historical developments, is it?
No. And in fact, I was talking with one of my students the other day. It's in my internet class, so it was via email, and we were talking about books, and I was saying how much I loved this book, and this is what also is fascinating about reading. And she said, I got 3/4 of the way through that, and it just seemed like a long romance, and I couldn't finish it. And I thought, wow, it's just a whole different way of looking at it. I looked at it not as a romance, but if they were ever going to finish that church, because it took forever.
Two different approaches. And that's fun to compare those notes between two readers. Now we're back to, I believe both Denise and Deborah have another book that they've shared together.
They Came Like Swallows by William Maxwell.
Share that with us. Again, I was interrupting with my comments, so again, tell us the title.
They Came Like Swallows by William Maxwell, who just died recently, within the last year or two. But again, this is set during World War I, during the flu epidemic that was going around in 1918, and the mother is the one who contracts the flu, and should we say what happened? Well, anyway.
She is the center.
Yeah.
She is
the center of the family.
The center of the family, and her death is actually tragic for this family.
It is. And the little boy.
The little boy, who's about 8 years old,
Which
is the main character, and his name is Bunny in the novel. But to give you some idea of the relationship that Bunny has with his mother, I'd just like to read this little short paragraph. Always when he and his mother were alone, the library seemed intimate and familiar. They did not speak or even raise their eyes except occasionally, yet around and through what they were doing, each of them was aware of the other's presence. If his mother was not there, if she was upstairs in her room or out in the kitchen explaining to Sophie about lunch, nothing was real to Bunny or alive. The vermilion leaves and yellow leaves, folding and unfolding upon the curtains, depended utterly upon his mother. Without her, they had no movement and no color.
That sets the stage for when she dies. I've not read the book, but that's so obvious that when she dies, that's the struggle he's going to have, because he needed her presence for that particular part of his life to enjoy. Sounds like that one is very, and again, we're dealing with fiction, but it has obviously a connection to real life. And it sounds like a very sad story.
Well, it is. And actually, William Maxwell did lose his mother at a very early age. And I believe it may have been the flu epidemic.
So, it's using fiction. It's come from a real life experience.
Right. I think this was probably a catharsis.
You both had indicated before the program how much you liked him as a writer, and he's done other work. So
yes, he has. It's a small output. In fact, he's only recently, I think, he's one of those authors who's been rediscovered, and he wrote a lot of short stories that are out in collections, and I think this is my favorite novel of his by far. But I was trying to think. There was another one of his I had read too.
Certainly, the center of that is, I believe I'm correct to say that in this country, there's never been an epidemic that, like over a year or something, that took that many lives as that particular epidemic. There were millions, I believe, died of it.
Right. Yeah. Worldwide. Yeah.
Annie, I think you have a third book with you.
Yes, I have a third book with me, and the actual. This one I stumbled on. I have a friend who owns a bookstore, and I belong to a book reading club like they do. And so one Christmas she brought us all books that she got as advanced copies. And now this one is out, and it's called, and I'll pronounce it very carefully because the last time I said this somebody misunderstood me, The Death of the Shoe.
The Death of the Shoe.
Yeah.
By
Suri, S-U-R-I, Mandel Suri. And the reason I said that, one time I said it, and somebody came back and they kept saying, the death of a shoe, the death of a shoe. And they couldn't understand what I was talking about. So anyway, it takes place in India, and I think that probably Denise and Deborah would agree with me. One of the reasons that I enjoy reading is I like to go to different countries. I like to go to different lifestyles. And this particular book takes place in India. And Vishu was kind of we might think of it as the person in the apartment house that takes care of everyone. But instead of having his own place to live, he lived on the landing because it's in Bombay and there's no room. And even the landing is considered, and landing in the stairs is considered prime living, is to actually live on the steps. And but anyway, he dies, and it's kind of got a spiritual aspect to it. But then they're also kind of a bizarre. They have some really kind of funny characters that everybody in the apartment is like arguing who should pay for the ambulance, and they can't decide who's going to pay for the ambulance. And poor guy's laying there dead on the steps, and nobody can decide. And then they get in a big fight, and everybody goes back into their own apartments and leaves him and stuff. And people step over the top of him and everything. So, but then there's all this underlining, all this subplots to it and stuff. It's a fascinating story.
It appears to me that you have done two things this year in summer. Last week when we were on the show, most of your nonfiction books had a lot of humor in it. I don't see a lot of humor in your fiction reading. So, in all seriousness, do you sometimes when you're reading, at the same time you're reading some that are fiction, nonfiction, that may be very deliberate, that you go back between things that are a little lighter and humorous and things that are very serious and in some cases spiritual?
I don't plan that well. I end up just getting a list of all these things that I get from other people or from reading book reviews, and then I just start reading. But occasionally if I get into something that I realize I'm not ready for a really heavy book right now, I'll put it down and go find something else and then come back to it later.
That brings me to the question we asked last year, and is you read, people are very different in the reading style, like Andy's talking about one of her students. Do you read one book at a time, or do you start several and
we're guilty of reading several at the same time.
I think there must be 6 around the house, and I'm in various stages
of
each one of them. No, never have. One's in the bedroom, one's in the TV room, one's in the living room.
But you don't get any of the stories mixed up or the characters.
They're usually quite different. If it's a really good one, though, we'll stop what we're doing and just finish that one. Usually.
Yeah, I have done that when when something has been so good, then I just can't put it down, and then I'll stay up all night reading it and come into work the next day. Yeah. Totally in the bag.
See, I'm different. I have to read it. Like it's kind of like, and I know that these two do too. That write down all of our books in a journal. And my goal each year is to read 50 books, and so I'm kind of a person that's really goal-oriented. So I have to stay with the book and finish it, so I can write it down in my little journal and check one more number.
Your goal is 50 books this year.
Yeah, 50 books. I've had that goal for probably the last 6 or 7 years, and probably this guy's probably do. I probably do between 50 and 55.
Since you're so structured, Annie, and setting your goals, do you ever start a book and it is just not bearable? Do you have a guilt feeling if you don't finish a book, like that you have an obligation to finish?
Well, yeah, I have motivation if it's a book club selection and I want to finish it to read it in the book club. I actually, and this is probably weird to do, but I actually think cost. I picked this one up at 50 cents at a garage sale, so it's like cost involved or whatever. Time involved. Pretty soon I just start hating the characters and stuff, and I just start thinking it's not worth my time. Actually, I cheat. You guys probably never do this. I go to the end of the book to see if the character is still alive. And how we have to put up with, there's like one icky character by the name of William, and I always, every time William comes in, I just cringe. And so I'm thinking, how long do we have to put up with him?
Well, that's really fascinating. Denise, I think you have a couple other books there that we want to get to.
Well, the only reason that I brought this along with me was because this author at the beginning of If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler by Italio Calvino has a wonderful section on preparing to read. Are you comfortable? Do you like to read in a chair sitting up with your feet up? Do you want to read on your stomach? Do you read in bed? Do you have the light fixed so that you have the proper amount of light? Yeah. Make sure all of your chores are done. Nothing will interrupt you. Is there a cup of tea on the stand next to you if you must have tea? In other words, he has this wonderful, beginning chapter about.
Does he suggest those that don't like tea that maybe they have bourbon?
Whatever.
Chocolate.
Chocolate, yeah.
Yes, and he also talks about all the books that we encounter, the books we plan to read, the books that we are going to read when we retire because they're too fat to read right now and we're too busy.
What's the name of that book again?
This is called If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino, but he breaks books down. Books you needn't read, the books made for purposes other than reading, books read even before you open them, since they belong to the category of books read before being written. And he goes on and on with the books you must read first, the books too expensive now and you'll wait till they're remaindered. Which a few of us have done that. I have this one that was a $2.98 special right
The
here.
books that we wait for Denise to get in the library.
That's
right. We haunt the library.
Or if a book comes out and it's in hardback, you hope it sells well enough to go into paperback. Or...
To paperback, or you haunt the remainder. This author who I love.
Let's deal with this other book.
Well, this actually isn't fiction. It's called The Eyes of the Heart by Frederick Buechner, and I'm afraid he's a I think he's an underread writer. And this one was remaindered for $2.98, and it actually pained me to pay that. I wanted to pay him full price. It's a memoir. He's a writer, a friend of the poet James Merrill, who died. But he's a fine little writer. If we have time, I'd just like to share this little paragraph. He sits in his library surrounded by his books. Shakespeare's not saying anything, and neither is L. Frank Baum. The Duc de Saint-Simon, the Buddha, Dostoevsky, Paul Tillich are all holding their tongues. Not a peep out of Abraham Lincoln, Meister Eckhart, or Emily Dickinson. Even Walt Whitman and the prophet Jeremiah are for the moment speechless. The air of the Magic Kingdom is electric with the silence they are keeping. And then he goes on to describe this, but he said, they are there for when I need them, but in the meanwhile there is not a word out of any of them. Like wise parents, they are giving me room to be myself.
Very interesting.
They speak when he needs them to speak, and they're silent.
Your choice. There's a relationship between the two books that you just talked about suggestions. Even he is suggesting, about you making choices in your reading.
Oh, absolutely.
It is clear that all three of you read a lot of fiction and nonfiction. But they are readers who read almost all fiction. Others don't like fiction and do nonfiction. What advice do you have to readers? Denise started the program last week with saying, this is my choice, is that, it may not be the same for others, but I would like for you to speak to that issue of why, or I assume you enjoy almost equally fiction and nonfiction.
I do, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I would say my reading is about 50% fiction, 50% nonfiction. I balance them out. I think my major criterion is it well written? And I will read it.
On that very note, you indicated earlier, Denise, that you'll be reading a book and you like the author so much, and that author is referring to another author in the book, and that's a good guide for you. But how do all three of you, even if you read 50 books a year, and there's thousands and thousands of books, and your time is valuable, what are the guidelines you use to make sure you're getting books that are really going to be worth your time? How do you sift between high quality and those that you don't care for? Deborah?
That's where sometimes the book reviews are really helpful. I talked to Denise, but that's her job, so she's always sending me to particular books. So the ones that she orders in the library. In fact, that's why I read a lot more nonfiction now than I used to, because our academic library at NIC has, what did you say, mainly she's been ordering 95% nonfiction. So I've found that I'm reading a lot more nonfiction, and it's really high quality nonfiction. But things like reviews, for example, the Atlantic Monthly, there are a lot more book reviews now than there used to be because they've kind of changed their format. So I'll read those, and that will send me to a particular book that I might want to read, or authors that I already know. I know that I will want to read anything of that particular writer that comes out. But yeah, it's and sometimes word of mouth. I find it interesting that I've read a lot of the same things Annie read, and we haven't really communicated, I think, since we're spread out on campus, and I'm not even sure how we both got the same books on our list, but somehow we did. So there's something that goes on that is probably word of mouth.
That plus, you made a good point about the critique of books that can be very helpful. And I assume that there are certain writers that critique books that you have great value in their judgment too. Is that correct?
I'll read the New York Review of Books and the New York Times book review, and there are reviewers who frequently review, and then authors review other authors' works. So if there's an author whose work I respect, if there's an author I respect as a writer, I will probably respect that author as a reviewer also. And so
you have to watch out for things like blurbs on
Yes.
jacket covers, because those are basically kind of, I'll review your book, well, if you do mine well.
That's a PR
But,
promotion.
yeah, it
that's a
is.
PR.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I have a question for you that I've never asked you ever before. This is an impossible question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Hope I'll get an answer from someone. After all this years of reading and all, if you only had one book you could keep, you had a favorite book,
No, don't ask me.
which one would you choose? That you're only going to have one. All of the books are going to be out of your life. What is the most valuable book you've ever read? I told you it was a very difficult question.
Oh dear.
Well, I'd just be melting down and a dither, because I couldn't possibly come down to just one book.
I think, well, I think back to what you even talked about. I think different books come into our lives at different points in our
Right.
life. That there's that book that sat on our shelf for so long, and all of a sudden, that this
And
is how
you're
I,
like some of my students, you're trying to avoid my question. That is,
Well, no, just a second. And
your
the book
comments are good.
Pulled off and falls onto your feet that day, and it's just like God saying, "This is the book for you right now."
that's a wonderful answer, but I just have to have some fun. Denise, you look, your nonverbal was
Well,
painful.
I have to admit, that probably the one book that I would take with me would be the King James Version of the Bible.
Okay.
I have to admit, if somebody said you may only have one, probably because the Book of Job is one of my favorite stories, and I return to it over. It's so rich.
Well, Denise, thank you for answering my question. And your answer was wonderful, too, and that was a terribly difficult question. It just came to my mind from all of your comments, and so I think all three of you, you're wonderful, and you have done so much for this institution and students and your reading. It's always great to have you here, and we'll do this again. And I know our viewers got some great ideas, and they can call Denise Clark. We've had a number up on the screen here at North Idaho College, or they can call North Idaho College Library and talk with Denise. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed these two programs as much as I have and bring them to you, and you can see the great talent of our guest and how very important reading is. And again, I thank all three of our guests for being here, and I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at the same time when we'll move to yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.